Professor Oded Lipschits from the Department of Archaeology and Ancient Near Eastern Cultures at Tel Aviv University is inviting you to join him to a journey following those who composed the historical descriptions in the Hebrew Bible.
The Untold Story of the Kingdom of Judah, Part E. The Untold Story about the Kingdom of Judah in the days of the biblical historiographers. Chapter 3. The Untold Story about the magnificent administrative centers that were established near Jerusalem and the changes that took place in the administration of the kingdom and its economy in the days of King Ahaz. In the century in which Judah was under Assyrian rule, from 732 to just after 630 BCE, the areas surrounding Jerusalem to the north, west, and south developed substantially, becoming more central to the administration and economy of the kingdom. Throughout the entire region, and especially on the ridge south of Jerusalem between Armon Hanatziv and Ramat Raḥel, economic, administrative, and political processes took place that didn't coincide with what was happening in the city itself. In many respects, these processes were entirely disconnected from what was happening in the capital of the kingdom. The progress taking place in the areas surrounding Jerusalem enabled the continuation of life in the kingdom's capital under Assyrian rule, the continued rule of the house of David, the existence of the temple, and the continued existence of the Jerusalemite elite. There is no evidence for this development, which took place in an area so close to Jerusalem, a few minutes' walk to the south, west, and north, in the biblical descriptions. This description focused mainly on Jerusalem's continued existence as the undisputed center of the nation's life, the seat of the kings from the house of David, and the location of the temple. The historiography centers entirely on the perspective on Jerusalem from within Jerusalem, making no mention of the tremendous developments that took place in the entire immediate area surrounding the city, including magnificent buildings that faced Jerusalem and could be seen from the city. This massive omission can be understood only as the message itself. Anyone who has lived in Jerusalem or visited it must have seen the glorious building on Ramat Raḥel, towering over the entire area around Jerusalem, the splendid gardens that surrounded it, and the magnificent architecture that characterized it. The evidence of grand feasts found at the site indicates that the Judahite elite was invited to the place and witnessed this splendor up close. The magnificent structure that was recently discovered in Mordot Arnona and the villa in Armon Hanatziv were also well known, and the erasure of all of this from the biblical historiography shows how one-sidedly it intended to serve the ideology of the royal house and the priesthood in Jerusalem without anything else being able to endanger it. The omission then is the message. The untold story is the story. From the general picture obtained from the archaeological research around Jerusalem, it emerges that at the heart of the economic and administrative system that operated in Judah during the Assyrian rule lies the magnificent administrative center that was established in Ramat Raḥel, and neighboring it, the administrative building that was established in Mordot Arnona a few hundred meters to the northeast. The archaeological finds that were uncovered at the two sites offer a glimpse into the area surrounding Jerusalem before and after Sennacherib's campaign in 701 BCE, enabling us to reflect on the role of this area in the economy and administration of Judah in general and of the region near Jerusalem in particular. analyzing the relationship between the finds uncovered at these two sites could provide all the other developments around Jerusalem a well-established date as well as historical context. Moreover, close inquiry into these finds can coalesce the additional phenomena that characterize the material culture of this period into a single historical picture regarding the administration and economy of Judah at the beginning of the Age of Empire, that long period of time in which, even after the century of Assyrian rule, other empires continued to rule the entire area, the Egyptian, the Babylonian, the Persian, and almost immediately after them, the Ptolemaics and the Seleucids, until the Hasmonean rebellion that ended 600 years of foreign rule in Judah. Based on the findings from the excavations in Mordot Arnona and the understanding of the relationship between the site and the large administrative center in Ramat Raḥel, the beginning of the development process of the entire area surrounding Jerusalem can be convincingly dated to the last third of the 8th century BCE. It means the reign of Ahaz and then Hezekiah. Moreover, we can explain this development as resulting from the enslavement of Judah to Assyria, the Assyrian pressure to develop the Judahite economy and administration, and the need to pay annual taxes to the empire. The archaeological finds indicate that after Sennacherib's campaign in 701 BCE and the loss of the lowlands, a new phase began in the history of Jerusalem's surroundings, which included not only the Armon, Hanatziv, Ramat, Raḥel ridge, but also the areas north of the city in Benjamin and west of the city, mainly in the Sorek and Rephaim valleys, the area of Moza, apparently as a result of the growing need to develop new agricultural lands. During this period, the agricultural areas around Jerusalem became more important, and the entire area underwent a rapid process of unprecedented development, which was apparently also spurred by the unknown but seemingly small amount of refugees, mainly from the lowlands, who came from the area that had been destroyed during the Assyrian campaign of 701 BCE. With the end of the 100 years of Assyrian rule in Judah in the early 630s BCE, during the reign of King Josiah, changes occurred again in the entire area, evidence of the influence of geopolitical situation had on the area surrounding Jerusalem. During this period, the development process in the Benjamin region stopped, and the area lost its importance to the administration and economy in Judah, while simultaneously efforts were renewed to resettle the lowlands region. During this period, there was also a sharp change in the Armon, Hanatziv, Ramat Raḥel ridge, as the site of Mordot Arnona lost its status and became another small agricultural settlement, while Ramat Raḥel consolidated its standing as the most important and only administrative center in the area south of Jerusalem. The status of Ramat Raḥel continued even after the destruction of Jerusalem and throughout the Age of Empires until the middle of the 2nd century BCE. This is the general picture, and now let's start from the beginning with all the details. The results of the excavations at the site of Mordot Arnona are the archaeological and chronological anchor that proves the beginning of development along the Armon Hanatziv Ramat Raḥel ridge as early as the last third of the 8th century BCE. During this period, a monumental structure was erected that existed for only about 20 or 30 years in total until the end of the century. This is the only evidence in the vicinity of Jerusalem of a settlement change that can be associated with Sennacherib's campaign of 701 BCE. The plan and architecture of this building are not adequately clear since they were buried under the huge stone heap that was erected on the site in the next building phase, but it was built of monolithic ashlar stones and its remains were removed apparently in a deliberate action as part of the construction of the stone heap and the structure that was immediately erected on top of it at the beginning of the 7th century BC after Sennacherib campaign. The existence and strength of this structure are testified to by many archaeological finds belonging to this phase, which include the abundance of pottery that dates to the end of the 8th century BCE and an unusual assemblage of lamelech and private stamped jar handles well dated to the end of the 8th century BCE. Comparison between the finds from the excavations at Ramat Raḥel and Mordot Arnona reveals similarities in the pottery assemblages, a similar number of lamelech and private stamped jar handles uncovered at both sites, and similar proportions of early lamelech stamp impressions from the late 8th century BCE and late stamp impressions from the early 7th century BCE. Such comparison reveals that the building on Ramat Raḥel was also constructed in the same era as the building in Mordot Arnona. One can also learn of the first building phase in Ramat Raḥel mainly from the many findings that were dated to the end of the 8th and the beginning of the 7th century BCE and were found under the floor of the magnificent palace that was built there after the Assyrian withdrawal from the area early in the last third of the 7th century BCE, 100 years later. Also in Ramat Raḥel, the buildings from the first building phase were either combined with or buried under during the construction of the second building phase or even dismantled down to their foundations. Therefore, it is difficult to reconstruct their plan and architectural characteristics. However, the western tower can be attributed to this phase, and this tower follows the prevailing construction style of Iron Age Judah, with wide walls built from mixture of fieldstones, limestone, nari, and flint blocks of varying size, large or medium, but all rough and uncut or partially and roughly hewn. The base of these walls is sometimes integrated into the rock outcropping and sometimes into shallow foundation trenches. This building resembled a fortress or a watchtower, and it stood erect on the hilltop on the spur's western side while controlling the main road at its foot, both viewing and being viewed from all directions. To the east of the tower, a building was erected, only a little of which has survived, built with beautiful hewn ashlar stone, some of them most beautiful found during this period in Judah. Decorated stone capitals were also incorporated, apparently, at the entrance of the building from this period. The findings and insights from the excavations in Mordot Arnona and their comparison with the findings from the excavation at Ramat Raḥel, as well as the comparison with the broader archaeological picture around Jerusalem, are an important starting point for understanding the development process of the material culture in this period. They shed new light on the history of the area surrounding Jerusalem during the 100 years of Assyrian rule and enable a better understanding of the changes that took place in the contemporaneous administration and economy and of the placement of the important administrative center in Ramat Raḥel within the overall historical picture. Beyond doubt, the administrative center in Ramat Raḥel was the most important and magnificent building among those erected at the end of the 8th century BCE along the ridge between Armon Hanatziv and Ramat Raḥel. It is also the only one of the buildings erected during this period along the ridge that continued to exist for about 600 years throughout the reigns of the largest empires in Judah until the Hasmonean revolt. After being founded as an administrative center in Judah under Assyrian rule, Ramat Rachel continued with only minor changes to serve an imperial administrative center in Judah throughout the years of Babylonian, Persian, and Ptolemaic, even the early Seleucid period. This structure was erected about 4 kilometers south of Jerusalem, at the end of the long ridge that slopes in a general direction to the south and closes from the east on the Rephaim Valley, which then became the Valley of the King, where the king's central royal estate south of Jerusalem was established with the aim of managing this estate and controlling its produce. Thus, the establishment of these royal estates is likely related to the establishment of the administrative centers in Ramat Rachel and Mordot Arnona, and it was likely also founded in the last third of the 8th century BCE as part of the arrangements for the transformation of Judah into a vassal kingdom of the Assyrian Empire. This system served as a southern agricultural frontier designed to ensure the supply of food to Jerusalem and to create a mechanism for the regular payment of the annual taxes to the Assyrian Empire. An interesting phenomenon related to this process of establishing the administrative center of Ramat Rachel and the royal estates in the Rephaim Valley involves the phenomena of the tumuli, rujum, a series of huge mounds of stones which were artificially placed around supporting walls, creating a phenomenon that is foreign to the landscape and stands out in its steepness and height. The tumuli were erected in parallel to the administrative center of Ramat Rachel on the hilltop surrounding the entire Rephaim Valley, facing Ramat Rachel, a place that can be seen from all the tumuli and the place from which all the tumuli can be seen. We have knowledge neither about the meaning underlying the tumuli nor about their significance in the landscape and prominence in the area. It seems that they are best understood as political, administrative, and or religious landmarks related to the administrative center established in Ramat Rachel. Next to the tumuli, there are agricultural installations, but no settlement sites, which are generally almost completely absent from the Rephaim Valley, the Valley of the King, with the exception of a central village in the area, Khirbet Eras, which is today located near the biblical zoo in the southernmost modern city of Jerusalem. We can assume that the magnificent edifice in Ramat Rachel was originally constructed as an administrative center for the collection of agricultural produce, which was intended to finance the payment of the kingdom's annual taxes. It might have also been the residence of the imperial supervisor of the vassal kingdom, a position known from Assyrian documents called the kepu. The role was to closely monitor the loyalty of the vassal kings, to receive from them information needed by the empire, to supervise the payment of the annual taxes and tributes, and to represent the king of Assyria. Since the administrative complex represented the power, greatness, and rule of the empire, it was erected in a place that overlooks all directions and can be seen from everywhere in the surroundings of Jerusalem, and its architecture was magnificent and unlike anything known in the small hilly kingdom. Moreover, during this period, no buildings stood on the ridge to the south of Jerusalem between Armon Hanatziv and Ramat Rachel. Thus, the ridge physically and visually separated the city of David, the site of the temple, the king's palace, and the home of the local elite in Jerusalem, from the new administrative center that was established in Ramat Rachel, and could also symbolically cut between the kingdom's capital and the symbol of the imperial rule in Judah. As such, The symbols of the monarchy and the internal independence of the Jerusalemite elite continued to exist undisturbed. There was no constant daily reminder to the Jerusalem elite of its subordination and vassal status. The continuous presence of the administrative center of the empire was not evident, and there was no visible interference by the empire in the routine conduct of the kingdom. The construction of the administrative building in Mordot Arnona likely complemented that of the administrative center in Ramat Raḥel. The location of the site in Mordot Arnona on the rock step facing east on the eastern slope of the Armon Hanatziv Ramat Raḥel ridge, but within a direct view towards Ramat Raḥel, was not accidental. Its existence strengthened the control over the administrative centers at the edge of the ridge and extended it to the agricultural areas to the north and east of it, which included the eastern slopes of the ridge and the agricultural estates established in the upper reaches of the Darga stream, which were beyond the area observed and controlled from Ramat Raḥel. It seems that the fortified tower, which was built about 1 kilometer east of Ramat Raḥel and half a kilometer south of the site of Mordot Arnona, at the entrance to today's village, Tzur Bacher, completes the defense and observation point for the eastern hinterland of Ramat Raḥel. These three buildings formed a kind of military, economic, and administrative triangle of control on the areas to the south, west, and east of the Armon Hanatziv Ramat Raḥel ridge, as well as on the ridge itself. The establishment of this triangle of control must be dated to the last third of the 8th century BCE, the period when Assyrian rule was established over Judah during the reigns of King Ahaz and then his son Hezekiah. This is tremendously significant for the understanding the history of Judah during this time period. The change from an independent kingdom to a vassal kingdom, which is obliged to pay annual taxes to the Assyrian Empire, alongside the demand and need to increase the production volume of agricultural products and the possibility of integrating into international trade within the empire's boundaries, led to the utilization of agricultural areas that had never been used until then. Some of these areas, such as the tributaries of Rephaim and the Sorek streams, had great potential, and the agricultural and administrative infrastructures that were established there for the first time during the last third of the 8th century BCE led to the continued use of these areas in the following centuries as well. On the other hand, some of the areas around Jerusalem had limited potential and were difficult for agriculture, such as the Ramot forest area northwest of Jerusalem. The natural potential for agriculture of these areas is limited, and therefore they were not settled and were not used for agriculture before the late 8th and early 7th century BCE, and the settlement in these areas was abandoned at the end of the 7th century BCE, never settled again. The abandonment of these areas can be linked to the period when the Assyrian Empire withdrew from the Levant, the pressure to pay taxes decreased, and above all, the possibility of Judah of settling in the lowlands was reopened. The appearance of the villages, farms, and agricultural facilities in the vicinity of Jerusalem should not be regarded as evidence of demographic growth, but rather as an expression of the development of the new economy of Judah under Assyrian rule. Their distribution along the Rephaim and Sorek tributaries is evidence of their connection to the agricultural activity in these areas, most likely the development of olive and grape vineyards, and the production of olive oil and wine, while the parallel existence of the center at Moza offers evidence for the development of the grain economy in an area adapted to this type of agriculture. To the west of Ramat Raḥel, the Rephaim Valley was an important component of the new economic system created under Assyrian rule, and it should be identified with the biblical Valley of the King. The discovery of decorated stone capital at Ein Jawiza, near the village of Walaje, and a second fragment of such a capital at the spring of Ein Chania are a clear indication that the valley was a royal estate, which was managed from the center in Ramat Raḥel and also included gardens designed in the Assyrian style. As mentioned, the system of tumuli surrounding the Rephaim Valley was another prominent feature of this unique landscape, a testament to the valley's connection to Ramat Raḥel and to Ramat Raḥel's control over the entire perimeter of the valley. All these innovations and the developments can be seen as evidence of the development process of agricultural estates, most likely royal estates, areas in the hill country and in the lowlands that belonged to the royal house of Judah, were relatively sparsely populated and had only limited agricultural cultivation up to that point of time. The names of the places written on the Lamelech stamp impressions likely represent the main royal estates that were established at this time. Socho in the Elah Valley, Hebron and Zif in the southern hill country, and Mamshat, maybe Mamshit, which might be identified with the royal estates of the Rephaim Valley, the Valley of the King. With the increasing Assyrian pressure on the development of the economy and the payment of the annual taxes, the development of these areas began. This process was not limited only to the region directly surrounding Jerusalem, but also included more distant areas, including, as we just spoke, the Hebron area, the southern hills country, and the Elah Valley in the southwest. The archaeological data presented above supports the notion that the enslavement to Assyria led to a sharp change in the history of the countryside surrounding Jerusalem and to its rapid development. All of the changes should be tied to the reign of Ahaz, who ruled Judah between 734 and 715 BCE, and as discussed in the previous chapter, was one of the wise and most determined leaders who reigned in the small kingdom. Ahaz led Judah through turbulent years, and throughout the years of his reign, he was a loyal Assyrian vassal. Given his realistic understanding of the international situation and leadership ability, he would sometimes impose his policies within the kingdom, apparently also on elites who opposed him. I argue that Ahaz's fingerprints can be found on all these developments that archaeological research has revealed in the south surrounding of Jerusalem, and which the biblical historiographers fail to speak a word of. By accepting the yoke of Assyrian rule and changing his status from an independent kingdom to a vassal kingdom, Judah was one of a handful of small kingdoms that survived the Assyrian conquest of Syria and the Levant in the second half of the 8th century BCE. The ruling elite in Judah was allowed to remain in power, as was the practice in other kingdoms in the periphery of the empire that surrendered to Assyria. In return, the Assyrians imposed vassal duties on them, including the payment of an annual tax, the sending of intelligence reports, the obligation to participate in Assyrian military campaigns, the provision of supplies to the Assyrian army during these campaigns. This change had immediate consequences for the material culture in Judah, as well as the administration and the local economy. In these respects, the servitude to Assyria was the most significant and influential event in the entire history of the Kingdom of Judah. It marked the beginning of a period of approximately 600 years, in which Judah was under the rule of large empires, first as an Assyrian, Egyptian, and Babylonian vassal kingdom from 732 to 586 BCE, and then, after the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BCE, as a Babylonian, Persian, Ptolemaic, and Seleucid province until the mid-2nd century BCE, when the Hasmonean state was established after the revolt. The administrative and economic arrangement established by the Assyrians and developed by the local Judahite leadership continued to be in effect and to develop over the following centuries. These arrangements became some of the most characteristic and well-known features of the economy, administration, and material culture in Judah. The production of jars uniform in their content and shape, stamp impressions on the handles of these jars, Ramat Raḥel as the main administrative center, and the introduction and use of the shekel weights, the agricultural economy, and etc. The existence of these characteristics over such a long period is evidence of their adaptation to the economy and administrative reality in Judah and to the fact that they were part of the international development and that was accepted also by the Judahite elite and reflect what this elite could have accepted, agreed to, continue to exist alongside, including paying the high taxes to the ruling empires in order to protect the national and cultic independence within Jerusalem and to allow the political, religious, and cultic life in Judah to flourish in the shadow of the empires. After Sennacherib's campaign, there was a sharp change in the site of Mordot Arnona, and this is the only evidence of the change in the material culture and the settlement pattern in the Jerusalem area during this period of time. The second building phase in Mordot Arnona expresses a major transition in the history of the site. The structure from the earlier building phase was dismantled, and a large-scale construction took place at the site, which changed the face of the landscape. As part of it, a huge tumulus was piled up, spanning around 4 to 7 dunams. It means more than half hectare in diameter, which slopes to the south and east across the steep slopes that come down from the top of the spur. The tumulus includes a huge and dense filling of flint stones of various sizes, and massive boundary walls were exposed inside and below it. It seems to have been piled up in a well-planned operation in which many resources were invested, and on top of which a wide foundation was built, above which apparently a monumental public structure rose. In the field that was placed between the foundation walls, a rich assemblage of pottery sherds was discovered, most of them intact from the first half of the 7th century BCE. This includes many lamelech jar handles, mainly dated to the early 7th century BCE, as well as concentric circles incised handles dated to the 2nd, 3rd of this century. Thus, this phase seems to be well defined chronologically. It was commenced at the beginning of the 7th century BCE and lasted until the last third of this century. The dismantling of the earlier building of Mordot Arnona, the monumental construction of the huge mound of stones, and the structure built above it further emphasized the role of the site in the local landscape. It was visible from almost anywhere along the ridge of Armon Hanatziv, Ramat Raḥel, controlled the entire eastern side of the hilltop, and created, together with Ramat Raḥel and the citadel at Tzur Bacher, the triangle of control at the southern end of the ridge. This can be seen as a strengthening of the government's visibility and presence in the entire region, perhaps as part of the tightening of the central control and supervision over the royal estate surrounding Jerusalem. This move took place in the last years of Hezekiah's reign or the first years of Menashe's reign, and may be related to Hezekiah's rebellion against Assyria between 704 and 701 BCE, or to the Assyrian response during the campaign against Judah in 701 BCE, or to the arrangements applied to Judah after Sennacherib's campaign of 701 BCE, or to other unknown circumstances related to the Assyrian campaign or its outcomes. During the second building phase in Mordot Arnona, the administrative center in Ramat Raḥel seems to have remained unchanged. This was the period when the magnificent structure in Armon Hanatziv was also built, standing in all its glory at the northern end of the Armon Hanatziv Ramat Raḥel ridge, towering right above Jerusalem and overlooking the city from the south. This building does not appear to be of the administrative system that was established in the southern part of the ridge, since there were no storage jar excavated at the place, no stamp impressions, and it was not built as an administrative building, but as a residential building of an elite who could afford to live outside the city of Jerusalem. The building is visible from and rises above Jerusalem, looking down on it from above and remaining in clear sight anywhere within the city itself. The architectural elements in this building are reminiscent of those of Ramat Raḥel and characterize this period. Decorated stone capitals, magnificent stone window balustrades, a rich garden that surrounded the building, and even a lavatory building located within the garden. All of these testify to the wealth and status of the owners of the place, and their ability to erect the building at that site suggests that they were part of the elite supported by the empire and were not subject to the king and the local social system in Jerusalem. It is possible that between the grand building on the northern tip of the Armon Hanatziv ridge and Mordot Arnona and Ramat Raḥel on the southern edge of the ridge, other buildings existed that were not found yet in the excavations. In any case, this regional development, well dated to the first 2/3 of the 7th century BCE, coincides with the long reign of King Menashe and the peak period of Assyrian rule in the entire area. At this time, the lowlands were already separated from Judah, so the importance of the agricultural areas around Jerusalem grew steadily. Quite likely, not only did the royal estates in the areas to the west and south of Jerusalem continue to develop, but also the increasing need to establish new agricultural areas after the laws of the lowland resulted in the rapid development of the entire area. This process included the settlement and development of areas that up to that time were uninhabited and not used for agriculture, such as Ramot Forest area in the northwest of Jerusalem, areas that were also abandoned at the end of this period when a path to return to the lowlands re-emerged. As noted, some of the reasons for the development of this area might have been caused by an apparently small influx of refugees that came from the areas that were destroyed during the Assyrian campaign, mainly from the lowlands. The fact that some of the farmlands were abandoned in the early last third of the 7th century BCE at the same time as the settlement in the lowlands was renewed support this assumption, as does the history of the settlement northwest and north of Jerusalem during this period, in which the Benjamin region also prospered agriculturally and administratively and became an important element in the economy and administration that developed under Assyrian rule. the main centers that developed at the same time in Benjamin were El Jib, which is biblical Gibeon, Tel Natzbe, which is biblical Mitzpah, Khirbet El Burj, probably biblical Be'erot, and Tel El Ful, probably biblical Gibeah. In this case as well, the biblical descriptions make no reference to these settlements and economic and administrative processes they underwent. We learn about all this only from the archaeological findings. When Assyria retreated from the area in the early last third of the 7th century BCE, in the days of King Josiah, a sharp change began to emerge in the entire system that developed and prospered throughout the century of empire's rule in Judah. In Ramat Raḥel and Mordot Arnona, there is clear evidence of this change alongside the simultaneous appearance of the rosette stamped jar handle administration system, so a new phase of the administration began. Regarding this period as well, an analysis of the archaeological data excavated at these two sites is an important key to understanding the changes taking place in Jerusalem's surroundings in concurrence with a sharp decline of the status of the region of Benjamin, with the administrative system and economy of the kingdom, and partial return of Judah to the lowlands. At the same time as the foundation of the magnificent second building phase in Ramat Raḥel during the last third of the 7th century BCE, the administrative center in Mordot Arnona lost its monumentality and key position in the stamped jar administration and in the regional agriculture. From this point on, this site became just one of various small agricultural settlements in existence around Ramat Raḥel in the late 7th and early 6th centuries BCE, many of which, including the site of Mordot Arnona, continued to exist during the Persian period. In contrast, the second building phase at Ramat Raḥel is what gave the site its current monumental outline and added to it a splendor unknown everywhere in Judah. Its monumentality is not only the result of architectural elements used, but also an expression of the overall concept of planning the intricate complex with its uniform contours, the relationship between its components, and the quality of construction and the extensive infrastructure work is necessitated. A royal garden was added to the administrative center in Ramat Raḥel on a sunken, level surface which replaced the western slopes of the hill and surrounded the complex of buildings on its western side. Moreover, the large amount of quarry material produced during the quarrying and rock removed operation on the western slope of the hill was transported and poured on the northern and eastern slopes to level the extensive foundation and face the construction in the planner's desired direction. Here, courtyards, additional room complexes, and walls were erected. And so, at the top of the hill, oriented southeast-northwest, a complex of buildings and courtyards was erected, intentionally facing the east-west direction. The scope of the work required to adapt the natural outline of the ridge to the will of the planners is a testimony to the splendor and power of the empire, whose power was represented in this structure as was expressed in the investment, planning, and construction of the most magnificent palace that existed in Judah. The most notable change in the Judahite administrative system of the stamp impressions from the end of the 7th century BCE is re-emergence of the lowland region and its cities. After the destruction of the lowlands in 701 BCE, control of this area was transferred to the kingdoms of Philistia and especially to Ekron, and Judahite hold on the lowland weakened. Only in the early last third of the 7th century BCE, after Assyria withdrew from all its strongholds in the Levant, were the Judahite centers of government re-established in the lowlands, including Lachish, Azekah, and Timnat el-Batash. Alongside this re-empowerment of the lowlands, which regained prominence in the economic and administrative system of Judah, Benjamin simultaneously lost its status and importance. Notably, however, these changes as well have no echo in the biblical descriptions. In this case, the untold story is part of the historiography's focus on Jerusalem, the temple, and the kings of the house of David, and the descriptions of the Book of Kings do not truly reflect all the processes and dramatic changes that the environs of Jerusalem and the rest of the kingdom underwent during the century of Assyrian rule. The biblical historiography's omission of the magnificent buildings so close to Jerusalem, of the drastic administrative and economic changes, and of the very close presence of the empire in itself is the message that the historiographers wanted to convey to their contemporaries. They knew the reality and sought to ignore it in the text that described the history of Judah. In the next chapter, we'll deal with the untold story of the temple of Moza, which was also in the immediate vicinity of Jerusalem and was well known to all residents and visitors of the area. In the excavations conducted at the site, a temple was found that had existed throughout the days of the existence of the first temple in Jerusalem. And its complete omission from the biblical texts reflects the ideology of the biblical historiographers who sought to convey the message that there is only one legitimate place of cult to the God of Israel, even though they were aware that in practice this was not the case. This is another important and central example of the untold story. See you in the next chapter.